Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you doing?
I am good. It's a sunny Monday. How are you?
I am also good. Also sunny here, which is unusual for us to kind of sync up in terms of weather. So that's nice.
Yes, though it does make recording a bit harder. The struggle with the glare on the glasses and
God, you don't know this, listeners slash viewers, but we've just spent like 5 minutes, both of us going, is this better? How's this? Trying to sort out the lighting. And then we just abandoned ship so you can live with however this looks and whatever reflections are happening in the glasses. And listeners, you don't have to worry about a thing.
yeah, you're just like, I can't tell the difference. But today, dear listeners and viewers who are viewing, listening, we are doing a double header of the Buffy episodes I, Robot, You, Jane, and Puppet Show. In our pre-episode kind of briefing discussion, there's not as much medieval content in Puppet Show, though it does lie heavily in the Gothic and horror. I think you'd agree, like the
Yeah.
lighting and framing of like Snyder and the like.
Snyder, he's so good. I love Snyder. I'm so glad he's a
Or,
piece.
yeah. So this might be a bit of a topsy-turvy episode in regards to being a bit more heavy on iRobot Eugene, but that doesn't mean that we don't have like fun commentary, but just kind of letting you all know up front, because Alex and I both agreed that we actually like iRobot. That's how we'll abbreviate it, iRobot, more
Yes.
than Puppet Show. It needs more love.
Yeah,
So,
although Megan informed me, and I was shocked to hear this, that the bottom feeder episodes of season 1 are the pack, which I think we can all understand, but also I, Robot Eugene. And I was shocked to hear that because I think it's actually a pretty, maybe it's because I'm a medievalist, but I think it's a really interesting episode, especially watching it now. And maybe we'll unpack that a little bit to get
and
going.
like AI, it's incredibly timely. So
Oh, it's phenomenal.
we'll dive in, but first, as always, we need to introduce our coffee mugs.
Of course.
So, Alex, you go first.
Well, I liked last week so much, I'm repeating it. So I have, once again, my little vintage celestial blue espresso cup, and I'm drinking espresso. What about you? What are you up to today?
So today, again, everyone, I'm cat sitting, so these aren't my mugs. I'm trying to select from the cat sitting house mugs, and quite a few of them are either the Luke Crusade mugs, like I had last week, which are not too exciting, or they're colleges from like Oxford and Cambridge. But they do have two of the Penguin books. So today, trying to go with theme, I have Vile Bodies by Evelyn Waugh. Wow. Wagged. Whoa.
Whoa, right. So, listeners, if you've ever felt unconfident about pronouncing a name, you have two literal PhDs, one specifically in literature, one in literature, history, and horror, and we're both going, what? Ooh.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought it was a fitting title, even though it's much more about the commentary of excess in the 1930s. But that's my mug. And of course, we're both drinking, Alex.
Black coffee worship.
Yes.
Yeah, again, I enjoyed it so much last week that I've repeated it this week, and I'm having a little black coffee worship espresso.
And again, as last week, I'm doing a French press of Gothenburg. And with Black Coffee Worship, for those of you who don't recall from last week, but we have teamed up with them as a sponsor, collab, support scenario.
Co-conspirator, they're here to accompany our demented chats, and we're very grateful to them.
Exactly. And so if you want to try some of this fantastic coffee, and they have so many blends that outside of Gothenburg for every different type of palette and style, you can get 10% off your next order with our very own unique discount code, which is
Dames Mac 10. So that is DAMESMAC0, and that gets you 10% off. That's correct, isn't it? 10%?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's on whatever blend you want to buy. It doesn't just have to be Gothenburg, as Megan has pointed out.
Yes, so check them out. Check us out further. So once again, thank you so much, Black Coffee Worship.
Yes, we appreciate you.
Yes. So, Buffy, dun da da da. I'm just briefly, as always, going to give the show writers and directors for both episodes, just get that kind of content out of the way. So for iRobot Eugene, which is the 8th episode of the season, it was written by two people, Ashley Gable and Thomas A. Swidden, and directed by Stephen L. Posey. And then we've got Puppet Show, which was written by Dean Batali and Rob Dezotel, and directed by Ellen S. Pressman.
Like, I've got to say, like, just off the bat, neither of these episodes required two writers. Like, that seems like an excessive amount of writers for the episodes we got.
I feel like season 1, so we've heard of Rob Day's Hotel and Dean Batali. They've done other episodes. I kind of feel like they were trying to find what the vibe was for Buffy and testing out different writers to see how that style jives. So it is quite funny that Dean Batali and Rob Day's Hotel, who we know continue on as writers and I think occasional directors, did Puppet Show, the one we're not as keen on. But the other two writers for iRobot, Ashley Gable and Thomas Swindon, I don't know if we encounter them again.
I will take your word for that. You are far more au fait on the writers and the directors, because unless it's like Joss Whedon or is it Kazui? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Kaz Kazooie, and then because they were on board of the original film.
Yeah, unless it's them, I got nothing.
Well, and you got Marty Noxon.
Of course, Marty Noxon. I love Marty Noxon, actually. So sorry.
So,
apologies.
But how do you want to do this, Alex? Do you want to do a summary of both episodes? Like we each do one and then we kind of go on so that we can kind of mix and match.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah.
Cool. Are you okay with me doing iRobot and you doing Puppet Show?
I will absolutely do Puppet Show.
Perfect. So, iRobot, You Jane. It opens in 1418 Cortona, Italy. We're in a monastery. It's golden light because of the candles. Friars or monks with really funny haircuts and their brown, habits and everything.
Just very default medieval monk.
Yes, and we'll crunch into that a little bit more. But it's very much trying to set, this is medieval. This is back in the days of
so serious.
And we have a man who is just saying, I love you. I'll do anything for you. Yes. And it kind of turns or pivots, and it's this big green evil looking demon with horns and
Charlie horns,
scary demon teeth and deep voice, and he goes, do you love me? And the monk says yes, and then the demon just snaps his neck, and so it causes chaos where we as viewers are like, oh, demon bad, but we're trying to figure out why these monks, right, who are dedicated to God, are dedicating themselves to this entity. Then we get this dramatic scene of the monks forming what is called a circle of Kalis, which is a type of mystical or spiritual circle to bind the entire entity of the demon to a book. And there's this great shot where they're reciting in relatively poor Latin. I myself am not like a Latinist, but I have heard other Latin scholars go, yeah, that almost pig Latin, what they're saying.
The audience, it's like, that'll do. No, that's the symbolism of Latin.
Yes, as a medievalist, despite our entire purpose of this podcast being kind of niggly and nitpicky, but also giving kudos, I'm okay with the Latin not being perfect. It was the 90s after all. So, but they're binding the entity of this demon, Malak, to a text. So we start seeing, it's dramatic and he's going, no! And then this kind of cryptic, demonic, mysterious text is appearing in the manuscript. The book is then tucked away in a box, and they're saying, oh, hopefully no one will ever find this box and read it aloud, because if you read it aloud, Malak, the demon, is released. Then there's a great cut to where the next scene is Buffy opening the box and peering in, and it's because the library are scanning texts into the library database.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a totally legit move. That is something that libraries would do.
Also, a public high school library, American public high school, right? Getting all these medieval texts as if it's not an issue, right? Like, it's again, Buffy logic.
Move. Like, the thing is, I would be fine for all of it. Because, okay, right, Giles is going to get these ancient texts, and maybe for the Watcher Council, he has to get them online. But suddenly students are involved, and another teacher is kind of facilitating. And I get that they want that because they want that tension, which we'll discuss more in a minute. But it is just such a, come on, you could have come up with a better plot. Although, having said that, I was their target audience. I watched this episode at the right age that their target audience was supposed to be. None of these issues occurred to me. I just went, yes, of course, they are scanning books. That is something that high schoolers will do. Yes.
Yeah, same. Even watching it now, for me, it's more getting this most likely very expensive medieval text delivered to a library rather than the process of them using those hand scanners, which I've used in the past, going to archives to scan letters and texts that rather than taking a picture on your phone, you scan it. Now phones are so much easier to do, but anywho, so we're in the library, of course, the center of everything. And we've got, the Scoobies, plus, as Alex alluded to, a new teacher, Miss Jenny Calendar, who turns out to be the computer teacher on campus, and her two, I'll call them acolytes, Dave and Fritz, who are doing the kind of tech aspect of the scanning. It's all very confusing and vague on what they're actually doing.
Yeah, Jenny does at some point say, I came, like later on in the episode, she swans into the library to say, I just came to check that your database isn't glitching, because knowing you won't have looked at it. And it's like, what does that mean? Aside from throwing in some fun tech speak like glitch and database, what does that mean, Jennifer?
Yeah. And again, this episode, you'll hear us say it probably a few times. There is just a lot of, they're throwing in the jargon and lingo of tech computer speak. I don't think it's in this episode, maybe it is, where they refer to the internet as the web, the net. So it's quite, those colloquialisms in a sense are quite fun because they're just archaic now. We don't use them unless you're trying to evoke this sense of time. But basically what happens is Willow stays late doing scanning of many, many texts, and she ends up scanning the Malak text, and she's not paying attention to what she's doing. She's doing it quite mechanically. And as she's scanning the text, the literal written text of the demon is disappearing as she's scanning, and it's going into the computer. The scanner is not just scanning, it is reading the text. So basically the whole plot becomes, there's a demon in the computer, and then there's a demon in the internet. And it jumps to a week later. Willow has started talking on an online chat database server, like AOL, MSN. Were there others? I used AOL, AIM.
And there were chat rooms like MIRC and things like that. So, but it's none of those. It is just a generic white box on screen text appears.
Yes.
And she's talking to a boy. You won't know him. He doesn't go to this school.
Yeah, named Malcolm. They agree on everything, which should just be a red flag there. And Willow is clearly getting enamored, and Buffy's red flags start kind of going up because Willow doesn't know what he looks like. They haven't shared any of that information. And Xander's jealous because he likes being Willow's number one.
Yeah.
And so there's that side dynamic. Willow gets kind of more and more sucked into this online realm, this online relationship, to the point where she's missing classes. She's not coming into school until about fifth period. And she's lying to Buffy about it. At one point, she says she overslept. At another, she says blowing off classes. And for Buffy, that is a major no-no. This is Willow that we're talking about.
And also, you can really feel that this is the after-school special episode of the dangers of meeting people on the internet. Now, younger listeners / watchers will not remember the sheer horror of the 90s, early 2000s, where you do not give out your personal details on the internet. You do not trust anything that exists on the internet. You have to default assume everyone on the internet is a dirty old man trying to chat you up. Like, it's, and there was no way to background check people. Now, like, if you chat to millennials of like my age and older, you will discuss with them about how it was difficult to kind of let go of that terror and fear, where it's like, I still feel uncomfortable saying what city I live in online, because what if people find me? And it doesn't matter now. LinkedIn exists, and so did Google Maps and all of this stuff. But this was a real fearful moment in the 90s, and Buffy and Xander have a conversation where Xander's like, who's going to guess that I'm not a Danish knitter if I'm in the Danish knitting chat room? And Buffy's like, oh my god, he could be anyone. He could be lying. He could be old. He could be, ugh. And they never go deep. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Xander, he's winding Buffy up. He goes, yeah, you meet up, you go to dinner, everything's fine. And then horrible axe murder. And Buffy's like, oh no, an axe murdering circus freak. And it is that just conflation, the panic, the spiral of who and what. But it's funny, Alex, hearing that, because I grew up at the very tail end of that kind of paranoia and panic, and the transition to it being a bit more normal, because then you have phone books that were existed that had your name, your address, your phone number. But I guess because that was not as instant and it was more work, but the concept of a phone book to me is also just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's strange.
So we have that kind of storyline going on. And we also then have Fritz and Dave, who are so logged in and locked in, jacked in, to use Fritz's expression, into the computer that it's a great scene. Miss Calendar comes into class late, and she's holding like a coffee and a crepe, and she's clearly disheveled. Her hair, her like long bob is crimped.
She's got sunglasses on, and it's very hangover coded.
Very hangover coded, and you're like, but there's only the bronze. So she must have been out at the bronze, or, I don't know.
Yeah, or it's the walk of shame, which
Yeah.
apply shame to the walk of shame. I'm using an anachronistic term, but to indicate she spent the night out.
Yes. And she settles herself in, and then she takes up the computer logs. So back when you had to actually keep track of how, like, when you logged into the computer and when you logged out, I'm assuming for consumption purposes of like power, and I don't know, I never had to do a log, but I know that those existed. Did you, Alex, have to ever do?
It was mostly just so they could keep track of what you were looking at online, really, and who was using the computers when, so that everyone got a fair amount of time, but the same people. Like, this is another thing that's interesting about the episode, actually, is how nerdy and alien technology is.
Mm-hmm.
Like this moment where Buffy's like, so how can I trace a digital letter? I can look at their profile, right? But they could have written that themselves. And then he goes, yes. And she goes, ooh, I have knowledge. And it's like, now the internet is just the water we swim in, It's like, it's just part of our world. But in the 90s, it was this really specialist, nerdy, not even place yet. It was just this hobby that was outlandish and strange and unsociable and a little bit icky. And I speak from experience because I was the nerdy computer type one. I knew how to code at one point, back when coding was still possible and everything wasn't locked in a Mac. So yeah, it's a really strange time to go back to in this episode.
Yeah, so Miss Calendar's looking at the log, and she goes, wow, you boys have been putting in some scary hours, because they are just locked in, and there's lots of shots of them just staring at, these big, clunky, but at the time of the moment, cutting-edge computers. And as it goes, things around the school start kind of happening. There's this funny scene where it's actually before the conversation, I believe, between Buffy and Xander, where this guy's got his laptop computer that looks just like a giant calculator to me.
Oh, it's so stupid. Like, I don't even remember. Like, I had a laptop around that time. It did not look that bad. It was chunky and it was black, but it was a visible laptop.
And he's like, what? I didn't write that. And it was saying that, Hitler's Nazi power was a case example, a good example of some sort of society.
Like, it was a positive example of a well-organized society or something like that.
And the guy's like, what? I didn't write that. Someone's been in my files. So we're getting all this mayhem. Buffy's sleuthing about. And as she is sleuthing about, she's following Dave, the nicer of the two kind of nerd acolytes, to this warehouse, CRD, that we find out was once one of the top 3 employers at Sunnydale. It was a computer intelligence researching company that shut down the year prior. Xander knows that because his uncle was a janitor there. And Buffy follows Dave to CRD, and he's talking to like this scientist in his lab coat, and there's lots of activity going on. And she's like, but I thought it was shut. And we find out that something sinister is going on there. Simultaneously, Buffy is being watched by Fritz, because we get these great shots where it'll just go to the screen and be like, watch her being typed out. It reminds me, it's later on, but of Sex in the City, whenever she's writing on a computer kind of thing. It's just a funny, just that strategy to frame that something's happening. And so Fritz is watching Buffy. At one point, he tries to electrocute her by using Dave as kind of a decoy, saying, Willow's looking for you in the girls' locker room. Buffy goes in, there's a shower running. She goes, this is how droughts are caused, which I just thought was like a funny random. And then Dave decides that he can't sit with Buffy being hurt, potentially killed, so he shouts, Buffy! And she sees this live wire and gets hilariously, like, zapped out of the bathroom. Dave's run away. Buffy's shoes are smoking, her brown boots. And so we know that something really, really sinister is going on in regards to Fritz. And Dave goes in and starts talking to the computers in the computer classroom, saying, I can't do it. This isn't right. And it turns out that we do, trigger warning, get a really intense scene where we find out that Malcolm and Fritz make it look as though Dave has committed suicide by hanging in the computer lab. And it's just this really dark. We see Fritz carving into himself the letter M, so we're assuming it'll say Moloch. I'm not 100% sure. He's like, I'm jacked in. And so there's that going on. Willow is starting to kind of sense that something isn't right with Malcolm and their chat conversations, because he says, "Oh, well, Buffy's not a good influence. She got kicked out of her last school." And Willow's like, "How do you know that?" And he said, "It's on her permanent file." And Willow's like, "Why would you do that?" So her flags are going off. And eventually they realize, because they come across the book, because Miss Calendar was goading Giles in the library, flipping through the text and being like, "Oh, is this a diary?" Because it's all blank. Giles goes, "Oh my gosh, the scanner read the text." We get this great scene where Buffy's like, "He's gone binary on us. There's a demon in the internet." They're trying to figure out what to do. It turns out that Miss Calendar is totally in on everything because she is a technopagan.
I love it so much. I love it so much. And again, this is something that maybe you had to live in the era to kind of be aware of, but that was a total cultural move. Admittedly, the term techno-pagan did not exist except within Buffy, but there was a move where an interest, like you know the cliche about the teenager in the 90s getting into witchcraft and whatnot. You've seen the cliche of the girl practicing witchcraft. There's literally the craft. There's Sabrina the teenage witch. Like, that was a huge thing. And so, yes, that's me too. I was the teenager trying to practice witchcraft in the 90s, early 2000s. And doing that online became like a legitimate way of connecting with other people, because it's not like you can just walk out into the street and be like, "You, witch, us, friends, coven." Like, it just doesn't exist. But you could go online and you could go into chat rooms and you could go to New Moon Occult Shop, is where I wasted so much of my youth just looking at like pentacle necklaces and chalices and FMAs and all of that. So Jenny Calendar is legitimately like a cultural icon of that moment. So do not dismiss this as Buffyverse nonsense, dear listeners and watchers. We lived it. We were there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know, of course, in the 90s, as Alex is saying, Wicca as a term was really big and popular. And my cousin, who was 4.5 years older than me, was really into that. I remember one time we were making our own wands to cast spells when I was about 7 and dipping them in candle wax. And so this is, yeah, very much all a part of that zeitgeist, that moment. Jenny's like, "Oh, I've been casting bones and all these sorts of things. There's been portents, so signs that something is off." And so they decide to join forces. Buffy and Xander go to CRD thinking something's up there. Jenny and Giles then are like, "We need to bind Moloch to something." They're thinking he's going to go back to the book, but they're like, "We have to form a circle of Kalis. We'll use the net to make the circle. It has to be in the system that Moloch is in." And we get some great scenes at CRD. Like, Buffy walks in and just like full on decks the security guard. And we don't see her causing violence like unnecessarily, but that was one where it's just like a big bap. They go into CRD and they're like, "Wait, there's cameras. Those are digital. Those are attached." And it's just another funny moment where we're so used to being, especially here in England, watched at all times by, Big Brother, all the cameras and speed cameras and CCTV, and that wasn't the norm then. So that always makes me chuckle where they see this like big ugly camera up in the corner.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's also worth noting that this happened just a few years before September 11th. So in the UK, especially, the whole "if you see something, say something" like catchphrase came in after September 11th. So yeah, there's kind of like surveillance culture really launched in like 2001. So this moment in Buffy being the late 90s, like 97, 98, something like that.
Yeah, this is 97 still right now.
Yeah. So that just wasn't like part of the culture. So, oh my god, cameras seeing us. It was like, also it shows that they're using the tech around them in a really cunning way. So yeah, it's endearing.
Yeah. And so to kind of just get to the final point, it turns out that the reason CRD has had so much activity is that Moloch has been not just communicating with Fritz and Dave, but other individuals to influence them to make him a large, gigantic cyborg metal body with the red eyes and everything. It looks like his old demonic body, but it's very, Terminator kind of
It's got rivets that don't rivet anything to anything. They're just separate.
He's like, to kill. And you're like, things are escalating very quickly. Buffy and Xander end up encountering the Moloch because he like bursts through a wall. And Buffy tries to hit him and she goes, ow, he's made of metal. Which I just thought was so funny because it's like, Buffy, just look at him.
Yeah, she just like goes to kick him both feet straight in the chest, drops dead to the floor, and then you just hear her go, "Tooth's made of metal." It's like, oh,
still technological, but he's in that specific entity, that body, which is very parallel to what happens in Puppet Show with the puppet Sid. And so since he's bound to that body, he is now defeatable, and Buffy sees that there's a giant circuit board in the middle of the wall, and she tricks him into thinking he's going to punch her face, but instead he punches the circuit and gets electrocuted. So he tried to electrocute Buffy, and in the end she electrocutes him, and Moloch is allegedly defeated, killed. And then we like all go back to Sunnydale. That's the end, and Giles is still like, books are better to Jenny Calendar, and she gives this great kind of gatekeeping discussion, which we will get into because this has been a very long summary, although we've added commentary. But did I miss anything, Alex? I mean, there's other bits and bobs, but in regards to...
You've got the solid plot. Yeah, no, that all makes perfect sense. You've got everything we need, and we can always just embroider the details when we analyze the actual, because there are actual like medieval things to discuss about this. Like, I'm so excited to get
into it. And trying to narrate is, I realize, actually kind of hard because there are those different storylines occurring, and how they mesh together is not narratively easy.
I mean, I suppose like if we were just doing it quick, it would have been demon haunts book, demon scanned into internet, demon haunts internet, Buffy fixes it, the end. But that isn't enough to kind of illustrate like what the episode was doing. Like, it was doing a lot, like as an artifact of the 90s, of early internet culture, of horror, of Gothic that uses medievalism-ishness to get across its aesthetic. It's doing a lot. So yeah, it needs unpacking like properly. Whereas the puppet, is it Puppet Show?
Puppet Show.
Puppet Show? Talent show is occurring in Sunnydale High. Giles gets pulled into orchestrating talent show against his will. Buffy, Willow, and Xander mock him until new principal Snyder overhears them and forces them to take part in the talent show. Also taking part in the talent show is... what is his name?
Malcolm? Oh, not Malcolm.
This is how good this episode is. We've both watched it like yesterday and are going...
Morning.
Who could that be?
I thought you were going to say Cordelia and her...
No, I'll get to her later. Teenage boy is doing ventriloquism act with
Morgan today. So Morgan. We'll go back. I'll cut that out, but
I quite liked it actually.
You can keep it. And not just Cordelia, but who else is in the puppet show? Morgan.
Oh, right, what? We hadn't mentioned Cordelia yet.
I mentioned her because I thought that's who you were gonna talk about.
Oh, is that the bit? Right, I tell you what, let's just rewind and I'll start again.
I derailed us. Per usual, sorry.
You're alright. Okay, so in the talent show is Morgan, who is doing a ventriloquism act with Sid. Now, the act seems to be that Morgan is inept, but Sid is suddenly really sophisticated. So that's kind of like the vibe that the dummy is supposed to be making fun of the ventriloquist for being useless. But the dummy is strange, sounds older, is incredibly inappropriately horny towards teenage girls. Buffy and crew begin to suspect that the Morgan, maybe the puppet, but probably Morgan, is possessed by a demon who is going around trying to get itself a heart and a brain to achieve something. What was it trying to achieve?
Every 7 years, this demon has to harvest, I don't know if they have to imbibe it, but harvest the brain and the heart so that it can maintain its human form.
Yeah, that's it. That's
it. Like,
that's all out as this is. It's kind of like a cricket, you know? So, however, twist. Turns out the puppet and Morgan are not the villains of the piece. They're also victim protagonists. So Morgan, sorrowful, he ends up dying. Sid, the puppet, turns out, is possessed or cursed by a human soul. So he is a real demon hunting human from like the 1920s who 1930s, who has been infused in the puppet body, and the puppet body is doing his best to try and kill this demon. Sid the puppet thought that Buffy was the demon. Eventually, they start working together to defeat the demon. Giles, because his brain is so brilliant, is put in peril at one point, but it's okay. They kill the demon, not Giles, on stage when the curtain opens and the talent show is going. And you have Snyder in the audience going, I don't get it. Is it avant-garde? Because they're, of course, in this tableau of a dead demon. And Buffy's holding this puppet that has died because the soul can now be laid to rest. And Xander and Willow are stood nearby, and Giles is on the floor. And Snyder's like, I don't get it. And then in the credits, you have this moment where Willow, Xander, and Buffy have this awkward attempt at a talent. And it's just incredibly cringeworthy. And it's kind of nice. I remember it being fun as a teenager, or I wasn't quite a teenager in 97, let's give myself some credit, as a child. It was nice seeing them be crap at something, because they were usually so self-assured, and they were saving the world, and they were stylish, and they were cute, and they were friendly, and it was just nice to see them struggle at something in a very normal teenage way. And it was like, yes.
Yeah, and it's also the only credits scene in all of Buffy. There's no other credits scene. At the very end, the Gur Arg from Mutant Enemy, Joss Whedon's production company, there are on a handful of episodes like special rather than Gur Arg. It says something.
It's so sad. Is one of
like, I need a hug. But this is the only Buffy end credits.
That's interesting. Ooh.
And it's I kind of wish they did more. Like it worked.
So the episode introduces Snyder, who is going to be important because I don't suppose this is a spoiler, but he remains the head teacher for the next couple of seasons, and he has some pivotal moments, so he is a lot of fun. I love Snyder. And no other real plot development to Buffy as a whole. It doesn't get referenced back to. The pack at least gets referred to now and again. The puppet, not so much.
All right. It's very much a one-off. And yet again, we have 3 deaths, because we have Emily, the girl who was a dancer. That's really all we know in the talent show. Murdered in the first act, because that's what causes them trying to investigate why they think that Morgan is evil. And then we have Morgan, whose brain is taken, but it turns out that he had brain cancer, so his brain's rejected. And then we have the demon itself that was someone named Mark. I always think it's funny with like demons and vampires in Buffy, where they choose to be teenagers in high school.
Who would?
Like, we have another character in a future season as a demon that she hates that's where she has to be.
Yeah.
That commentary. But with these, it's like, Mark seems happy being this really bad magician in high school. Why?
But I suppose you could almost argue, like, if that's the form your demon self takes, it's kind of like Claudia from Interview with the Vampire. So Claudia, for those who don't know from Interview with a Vampire, is a child. Like, she's literally about 5 when she gets turned into a vampire. So she literally cannot function in the world without another vampire acting as her caretaker. She can take care of herself completely, but a 5-year-old can't rent a flat. A 5-year-old can't buy property. A 5-year-old can't go out at night alone. She needs someone stood next to her to legitimize her presence. So these demons are like trapped in teenage form, and I like that there is that later commentary by a demon who is kind of like forced into this world. Yeah, but it pops up a lot.
But just kind of quickly back to the death thing really quick. It's funny because we see the Sunnydale police collecting Emily's body from it looks like the girls' locker room yet again, or the theater stage changing room. But like Giles walks out of the crime scene.
Yeah.
They're just there. There's like a nurse that walks out. And yet again, I know this is Buffy logic and Hellmouth metaphysics, but like, what the actual fuck?
Why is Giles, like, again, as a kid, it was like, of course Giles is allowed on the crime scene. He is a grown-up who works at the school. They would be allowed. And it's like, no, they would not.
Well, then we get this like funny montage scene of Buffy, Willow, Xander, and Giles interviewing all the different students that are in the talent show, trying to find clues. That's the police's job, to find out why this girl's heart was cut out of her chest with a knife. So I just had to point out the ineptitude of the police once again, and just the really silly Buffy logic of like, no, this is totally fine. School's definitely still running, and like the talent show is definitely going to continue occurring.
Yeah.
Because we're at body count. almost 10 now at the high school campus. Something, maybe not that high, but it's a lot. It's more than 0, which is where it should be.
Too many.
Yeah. But what is medieval about these episodes? What is dark? What is spooky? What is scary? So I guess just to kind of get us going, we'll start at the beginning of iRobot. So 1418, Cortona. I did some research of like why Cortona, Italy, if any reason at all. There's not one.
Yeah, I really did think they just Dr. Dolittle did, stood a pin in a map.
Yeah, it was just a magpie. I mean, Cortona has a long, rich history going back to the Etruscans. The only kind of interesting thing I found was that it was sold. The city was sold to the Medici family in 1411.
Interesting.
But so we have, the big bad Moloch, who masquerades as Malcolm in the internet. And I, in my thesis, talk about this episode quite a bit because of the Y2K anxiety. So this is 1997, and as we've been saying, technology bad, big, scary, sinister, all sorts of things. And for those of you who either don't remember or don't know, Y2K was a really sincere fear, especially in America. I don't know if it was as big in the UK.
We knew of it, and there were some people who were frightened of it, but largely we were incredibly skeptical. I remember, at one point asking an uncle, if everyone's so frightened about what the computers will do. So the idea was that when midnight hits on the year 2000, all the computers won't know what to do because they'll go to zero. And therefore, technological chaos will ensue. Planes will fall from the sky. That was a genuine, it was a reported fear. No one I knew feared these things. This is the thing. It's one of those moments where the sensationalist reporting and the actual boots on the ground beliefs did not necessarily match. But apparently people were wrapping their cars in chicken wire. I don't know why. And I remember asking my uncle, if everyone's so worried, why doesn't someone just buy a computer? And when you turn a computer on for the first time, so here's a tidbit for the people who don't remember the early days of the internet. Computers didn't automatically connect to the internet. So you had to set the time, the date, and all of that stuff manually. The internet didn't sort that out for you. You then had to click on an icon on your home screen to connect to the internet, and the internet didn't really interfere with your life unless you invited it. So clocks didn't automatically change with summertime or whatever. So I said to my uncle, why doesn't someone just set up their computer to think that it's 11:58 on New Year's Eve and see what it does? And he was like, I'm sure the scientists are doing that. And I'm like, why does it need to be scientists? But yeah, there was just this big belief that the world would end because we couldn't cope with technology betraying us.
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, it wasn't just the internet. It's because computers work in binaries, so a series of ones and zeros. But also, this is any kind of computing system. The turning to the year 2000, so 000, was stressful because once you got to 01, which is how you would do 2001. The computer couldn't tell if you were talking about 1901, 2001, 1701. So in regards to banking, it would cause mass chaos because the computers quite literally couldn't do their machine function of computing. So yeah, cars and things, but also, scanning at the grocery store, which we know we can live without that. So people were hoarding their tinned food and everything. Oh. Because of this idea of there's going to be mass chaos because because the world has become so technologically reliant that in regards, as Alex was saying, airplanes and banking and weather reporting and all those sorts of things are going to cease working. And because those don't work, people can't communicate. And because people can't communicate, it's going to turn into every single kind of riot apocalypse scenery that we see in a film or television show where things are on fire and people are running around and it's mayhem. So that was the Y2K fear. I remember it being talked about, but obviously nothing happened. The computers, that wasn't an issue.
It was also called the Millennium Bug.
Millennium Bug? I don't think I've ever heard that one. I've probably read it. No,
that was UK. I think that was UK specific. Everyone was frightened of the Millennium Bug.
But so those kind of anxieties are becoming increasingly tethered with the internet's emergence as a whole, and kind of technology being bad, technology being, incapable, not as good as humans, which is Giles' stance. But so we have two things, Moloch and his names. So I just like to point these out because I think they're kind of funny and synchronicity, if not intentionality. So Moloch is not only an Easter egg referencing to computer programmers. So not going to know what this means, but it's in my notes because it made sense elsewhere. In C-based language, there's a function named malloc, malloc, which is short for memory allocate. So this idea of memory and living memory and a demon having all this knowledge. But Moloch is also a Canaanite deity associated in biblical sources with the practice of child sacrifice. The name derives from combining the consonants of the Hebrew melech, king, and the vowels boshet, shame, and it's used in the Old Testament a handful of times for the variant of the god Baal, or Lord. So just kind of this association biblically and throughout time of child sacrifice and lording over others. But the second one, Malcolm, because it sounds like Moloch, but Malcolm actually means devotee to Saint Columba. It comes from Colm Mal, and so the Colm is short for Columba. But what was interesting was Saint Columba is kind of one of the 12 apostles of the British Isles Christianization, so primarily Scotland for Saint Columba. But one of the things that Saint Columba is the patron of is bookbinders.
Nice.
So again, synchronicity, intentionality, but those names kind of, if you think about it, it definitely fits with the episode. And so I think that's quite fun when those puzzle pieces fall
Absolutely
together in a way. And so yeah, as we said in the opening, Moloch and Cortona it's so medievalism. It's such a shorthand visually in regards to language, speaking Latin. Italian is also very often tethered to medievalism tropes.
And that will be through Dante and Dante's Inferno, because that was hugely influential. And also, of course, politically, Italy was quite the mover and shaker in the Middle Ages, especially.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Like today, right, Rome, the Pope, which is a living relic of lots of things from the Middle Ages. But what else is medieval in this episode, Alex?
Well, it's interesting that you brought up bookbinding and books, because the whole negative influence of books is not only a Gothic trope, but it's a Gothic trope with roots in the medieval. So there was this real fear. And again, it's technologically related, because we can forget nowadays that books are a technology. And so when bookbinding and printing were becoming more pervasive, anxieties about the effect reading and books would have on readers, especially readers who couldn't be controlled, despite, people were terrified of the influence of books. When the Gutenberg came about in the 1600s, was it 1600s, the Gutenberg Bible, when did that come about?
1500s.
1500s, yeah. So printing became available to everyone. There was a lot of fear about the power structures of what would get printed, who would print things, what they'd critique, whether they'd move politics. And then novels became popular, and suddenly it was but the women are reading novels. We can't let them do this. It will ruin their women.
It will ruin their women.
Ruin their women. That's a different rant, which I will have at a different point. But in the medieval era, yes, books were incredibly expensive. So the materials of books, they're made of vellum, which is a type of leather. Let's say it's the skin of sheep, usually. And it's treated and stretched and scraped and bleached, and it's this whole process. And there is no printing in the medieval era. Everything is handwritten, so you have to have skilled people, usually monks or scribes in medieval monasteries, having to handwrite out the text, and they'll usually copy it. And then you have the illustrations around the edges, again, incredibly detailed, incredibly skilled, and beautiful, and expensive. So the blue that you may have seen in medieval books, that actually comes from the stone lapis lazuli, which they would grind up into a paste and then paint. So they are literally jeweling books. Gold leaf as well, but that's obvious. Everyone knows gold leaf. Literal jewels. And fun feminist fact. There's kind of this belief that women weren't involved in the creative process of anything in the medieval era because they were just wives and mothers and sometimes nuns, and that's it for the women. Incorrect. They've actually been doing dental research on the remains of nuns, and they are finding that lapis lazuli pigments are being found in the dental plaque of the remains of these nuns. And what that means is these women were painting these books and missals as well, and licking the tips of their paintbrushes to get a nice fine point so they could do the detail work, thereby transferring the lapis lazuli to their mouths where it became embedded in the dental plaque. So all this time, all these books have been affiliated with anonymous workers, and that anonymous worker has been presumed to be male. We are now getting like archaeological, physical, bodily evidence that the women were part of the making process too.
Just briefly, that reminds me a lot of, the scandal in the early 20th century of the radium girls who would paint the radium numbers on watches so that they glowed in the dark. And also, just a quick aside on both of those, I was at Bletchley Park yesterday, which is where the British cracked the Enigma machine that was the encrypting machine for the Nazis. And there were women known as Wrens who were part of the Navy. Anyways, there is no physical documentation of them at Bletchley because everything was destroyed after the fact. However, in a restoration project in 2013, they found behind a plank of wood that had been painted over illustrations that these women had drawn on the walls and some kind of code breaking, because they probably didn't have paper or something. And it's the only physical presence of them having been there, even though it's documented. So just kind of, again, women being in these hidden secret histories, but they were there. So kind of tying it together in just these different time periods.
Yes, I love it. I love it so much. So that's a little bit of the history of the medieval book itself. So the people who had access to medieval books were upper class people, right? They had to know how to read most of the time. Prayer books are especially beautiful, not necessarily dependent on reading, because some of the painted pages of saints, for example, might have body parts of the saint worn away, where the person doing a prayer to that saint or supplication to that saint would touch that part of their body, like stomachs, like the Virgin Mary's stomach would often wear away if women were praying for fertility or to have children. So they wouldn't necessarily be able to read the book every single time, but they'd engage with the illustrations as well. So it's worth noting the class, because this brings me to the Gothic influence of books and whatnot. So I mentioned Dante when you were talking about how pervasive Italy is in its understanding of, or in the influence of the medieval era, or our perception of the medieval era. So Inferno, huge. The Commedia across the board is pretty big, but Inferno is the best one, and it's the one people tend to remember because it is literally a pilgrim and a guide going through hell to explain how hell works and the type of people who go to hell and why and how to avoid going to hell. Worth noting, Dante's Inferno has vastly influenced the way we think about Catholicism. It's not canonical. It's fan fiction. Like it's a narrative, it's literature. But people now, with a more casual understanding of Catholicism, assume things about heaven and hell that don't have a source in the Bible, but they do have a source in Dante's Inferno. It's fascinating. So the concept is, the Inferno is shaped kind of like a spiral that descends downwards towards Satan. Satan's at the very bottom of the Inferno, and it's cold in hell. Hell isn't hot because hell is so far away from God's love. God's love is warmth and light. Hell, the furthest point from warmth and light, becomes cold, icy, drafty. The wind is mentioned very often. And so each circle of hell, and that might be a phrase that you're familiar with, it's like the 13th circle of hell down here, and it never quite, relates to the actual circles of hell as Dante put them forward. But each circle of hell is dedicated to a different type of sin. And in the fourth circle, I believe, we meet Pablo and Isabella. Now, they are the lovers in the whirlwind, and they are incredibly important to medieval thinking. And also the Victorians loved them, absolutely obsessed. Isabella was called the sweet saint of sin by the Victorians, because she and Paolo fell in love, and they shouldn't have, because she was married to Paolo's brother. And through reading a book, they were so overcome with the love that was portrayed in the book that they kissed. And then from kissing, other things followed. This then led to Francesca's husband coming home, killing them both. He's not in hell, by the way. I don't believe he ends up in hell, or at least we don't meet him in hell the same way we meet Pablo and Isabella. Interesting. So, one of the things that this expresses is how dangerous the influence of a book could be, because they were reading the Vulgate Lancelot, which has the adulterous affair between Lancelot and Guinevere, and how Guinevere convinces Lancelot to kiss her, and that becomes the downfall of the Arthurian Knights, but it's written so romantically that Paolo and Francesca are overcome with love that they've imbibed from this book, that they then sin themselves. So it's very much putting sin in the pages of a book. It all starts there. This ripples out through the Gothic in really interesting ways. Anyone out there who has read Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, you know about the dangers of reading a book and what that can do to a soul, because one of the things that sends Dorian Gray totally wrong is that he reads this decadence book, this yellow covered book, which is so full of sin and perversity and awfulness. It's never told to us what's in the book, which is clever. He's so enamored of this book that he decides to emulate it. So it's the influence of a book and sin again. So the fall of Dorian Gray is because of vanity to begin with. He makes that wish. I wish that I could stay young and the portrait could age instead of me. And that starts all the trouble. But then he's given a book and he's like, oh, this looks like fun. Off he goes. So yeah, we have this interaction between what a book is, what a book does, how it influences people. It's also worth noting there is a great short story by M.R. James called Canon Albrecht's Scrapbook. And it's really interesting in relation to this Buffy episode, because the scrapbook is put together of torn out pages of multiple medieval texts that some antiquarian in some bygone day has just magpied all these fancy medieval bits, spliced them together into his own scrapbook. And then a later antiquarian comes across this book, buys it, and doesn't realize it is possessed by a demon. And as he reads it, the demon creeps closer and the demon creeps closer. And it's really like, it's a good story. I love it so much. So there you have like a literal representation of medieval books being possessed by demons, affecting the readers in the modern age at the time this story was being read. So I, Robot You, Jane has a really excellent medieval Gothic pedigree, and it's just a throwaway episode about the internet is dangerous, don't tell people where you live. Yeah. And yeah, it is completely engaging with this Gothic history of the influence, the negative, sinful influence of books on the reader, paired with, perfectly, how anxious we all were about the influence of technology on the user. Because we were also talking about video games at that time as well, and GTA became huge just not long afterwards, and everyone was like, do you know you can kill a prostitute in GTA? Our children are playing these games. They're going to grow up to be mass murderers. Spoiler alert, we didn't. We know the difference between a game and reality. Who knew? But it paired up with all this terror and stress and angst and anxiety. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it definitely is. Also films such as, this was in the 80s, but war games, and the idea of accidentally hacking into the government nuclear database. And we see Willow constantly, using the net to get into the city records and everything.
Totally fine.
Yeah, but that's a great kind of transition into also thinking about the commentary that is occurring between Jenny and Giles, because Giles is the one who is pro books, and he calls the internet, or not the internet, but the computer, the idiot box. And Jenny goes, that's the television. This isn't the idiot box, which I just thought was a funny kind of, because today they're also so conflated together, right? Because you stream things on your computer, and the TVs are all now smart TVs. But we get kind of early in the beginning, a conversation or a debate between them, and it continues throughout the episode. And it also sets up this idea of Fritz being way too intense in the techno sphere. So in that opening scene, post Cortona, Italy, but in the library, Fritz does this kind of, I'll call it a techno-messianic kind of view of what technology could be, but taken to the absolute extreme. And he says, the printed page is obsolete. Information isn't bound up anymore. It's an entity. The only reality is virtual. If you're not jacked in, you're not alive. And today, I feel like that is more real than anything, although jacked in, we don't use Ethernet, the
thing is
anymore.
We're just flooded with it. Wi-Fi. There is no jacking in because there's no jack anymore. We are just...
Yeah. But what he does do that we very much live in now is this displacement of physical place between the virtual and the physical. And so virtuality is like cyberspace, right? Which is also in lots of sci-fi and horror. And it being this like techno-scientific ecosphere or place that has a promise of a future that is technological, and that's the new reality. That's the only place to be alive. And so at the time, that was very much chat rooms and finding your people. And yet today we have that even more because, as Alex and I were saying earlier, everything about yourself is tethered to different online and digital platforms, you know? And you can't disappear, but if you were to lose all that information, that code, like in America, your social security number, you don't exist. It's gone. Instagram, everyone for the most part has at some point been addicted to posting your stories of your food and what you're eating and where you are, because that's how you communicate to other people that you're actually doing things and living.
Well, even employers now will look at your social media presence to figure out who you are, what your values are, whether you're in alignment with their company, what sort of things you post.
Yeah.
So social media, it's not just about presenting an aspect of yourself, although it is. It's about people then judging you in very real ways based on your social presence, social media presence. I feel like Giles has this complete Cassandra moment at one point, like I wrote it down, where he says to Jenny, where she's like, it's the future. And he's like, in which human interaction is all but obsolete, in which people can be completely manipulated by technology. Well, thank you, I'll pass. And it really is. I do feel like Giles was on the walls of a technological Troy shouting that the Greeks are coming because AI is just barreling towards us. Yeah, we are all getting manipulated by various things and algorithms. And Giles was there in the 90s telling us it's a bad idea. And we were all like, no, I want to be able to, order a pair of shoes offline. Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jenny is this really interesting fusion of the two. So we said she's a technopagan, right? So techno, the future technology, but then pagan. So this past that is connected to lore and mythology and different sets of histories. And so Jenny is bringing together these environmentally inflected spirituality of the pagan with calculation and technological innovation. So her last name, Calendar, right, is not only alluding to, a calendar we all use to organize our concept of space and time and future plans and past plans. And so you can think that is very rigid. They're in cells, right? Like the different days. But also, like in my thesis, I won't get super into it, but there was a form of medieval calculation called computus that was about calculating the end of days, the approach of the end of time. So we also have, the term computer and computus, because it means to calculate, they are directly connected through etymology. But, you also have Jenny Calendar kind of evoking this sense of waiting for the end of days. So this, again, a Y2K apocalypse kind of presence of the Hellmouth and this rupture of space and time, just as we're seeing those rupture of space and time in technology. So there's a lot of, I don't think that they knew about computus. And Saint Bede, who you may have heard of, he's, 8th century, very famous medieval figure, especially here in England, but he's one of the progenitors of computus. So I don't think they knew of him and all of this, but it is just adding these layers that are so rich to the commentary and lived experience of iRobot in just really fun ways. Jenny gives this wonderful little tidbit to Giles in one of their spats where he's taking the position, as Alex said, where she goes, you think the realm of the mystical is limited to ancient texts and relics? The bad old science made the magic go away? The divine exists in cyberspace, same as out here. And that's probably my quote of like the 2 episodes. Like, what is the divine then? How can it exist in cyberspace? And she's also asking, why can't you have your cake and eat it too? Why can't you have these old texts full of knowledge, but also the advantages of the internet and computers? And I think that is something that Buffy as a whole grapples with throughout the entire series.
And it's interesting as well because Jenny there is picking up on a kind of cultural belief where technology does displace magic in some degree. So there's even a Bronte quote from Shirley where they're talking about how the move towards the cities is destroying fairies because fairies can't exist in cities. And there's a Victorian story about gods being displaced, like before Neil Gaiman did American Gods, before Terry Pratchett was thinking about gods in Discworld, there was this text in the Victorian era, the title escapes me right now, about the gods being displaced by technology, by lack of belief. And there's even Keats has that science unweaves the rainbow, and the rainbow stands in for like beauty and inspiration and poetry, but also magic and enchantment. And so Jenny is definitely saying it doesn't have to be one or the other. Both can exist at once. And that as well is completely unique to Buffy. Like so often the default is technology, civilization moves in, magic and gods move out. And Jenny's saying, no, they can coexist. Mind blowing. Just amazing.
And those are still issues today. I mean, often demons and gods and other spiritual entities are used metaphorically, but that idea, and in the episode it's literal and metaphoric, of there being a demon in the internet is like so true. And so yeah, this episode just is, I love it because each time I watch it, I'm kind of, depending on what's happening in our current world with AI and Musk and all his nonsense and everything else, it's kind of like it's having a dialogue with that episode in ways that are different. And I think that that is also a signifier of like a really powerful storyline and just television show. And yeah, I could wax lyrical, but we do have another episode and we are conscientious of time. I was going to say one thing in this episode, it'll help us pivot into puppet show, is Xander's porn star shirt, because I'm getting to the problematic misogyny and sex demons, right? Of puppet show. So Buffy and other characters wear skirts that are problematically short, but you do what you want, right? But in these two episodes, Buffy's wearing some magnificent mini dresses and mini skirts. But I'm also like, if you bend over, there's nothing there. This is medieval curmudgeon.
Yeah, I hate to point this out as someone who lived through this at the time, but there were online forums of teenage boys who would screenshot upskirts of Buffy. Like there was like an attempt to gather, like there's one, I didn't mention it at the time, but we're talking about it now, in the Witch episode where Buffy leaps onto the burning cheerleader and covers her with the banner.
Yes.
There's an upskirt there, and that was very popular amongst the teenage boys because they would all try and gather these shots. So yeah, it is hideously problematic, and it was hideously problematic then. But again, it was just, we as girls weren't allowed to be upset about it because boys will be boys. That was it. You had to be cool with it in order to be cool. It was terrible. I'm glad times have changed.
Yeah, it's fucked. But and you're wearing a porn star shirt, I'm sorry, he'd be sent home. Even in public, like freedom of speech, but there are rules of what's allowed to wear on campus.
That was a meme shirt. That was legit. That was everywhere. People wore that shirt, that 70s font. Usually, like in the UK, it would just be a t-shirt style, but I saw it on like baseball style t-shirts. And then the porn star would be like the baseball team logo. That was like the Playboy Bunny. The Playboy Bunny became huge amongst girls' clothing not long after, where they'd all have Playboy Bunny logos on them.
I don't find the Playboy Bunny thing as problematic, but like the actual words, I don't know. For me, there's like a disconnect there. And I stopped because I was like, does it maybe say pork star? Which honestly isn't any better. But I was like, oh, did I read that right? I mean, also I remember this one guy at school in high school, and I can't remember the brand. It's like Running Man or something. And the figure makes a swastika, but it's the angle of the swastika of the original Jew. But you don't know that in high school. But the thing is that figure is like, it's very kind of like heavy metal goth, surrounded by flames and carrying a hatchet. So he had like the backpack, and then on free dress days, and I went to a Roman Catholic high school, he'd wear that stuff. And I just always remember thinking, I understand it's a brand, but, and I know that it's pushing those boundaries, but there's something here that is wildly uncomfortable and possibly feels neo-Nazi-esque, even though Spike was like the most liberal, far out, kind of, it was just this really bizarre, and I'm not shaming Buffy or any of the girls for wearing their short clothes, but just the porn star shirt was so obvious, but I didn't know that was like...
It was everywhere. It was a moment.
But to me, that kind of linked to, again, we've talked about it, Xander's problematic, fragile masculinity at points. And then Sid in Puppet Show, because they go like, oh, so like the raunchy puppet, ventriloquist puppet isn't an act, it's real. And he's like, yeah, I'm from the 30s. And again, it's just dismissed. And Buffy kind of calls him out on it, but it's also dismissing like, well, that was of the time and it's okay. And it's like...
It is really, again, it's eating cake and having it too. Like, there's a moment where Sid is telling his story, and he's like, I had no idea, you, the Slayer, you're so strong and fast and nubile. And he gets kind of creepy, and everyone goes, ew. But the problem is, it invites us to objectify Buffy through Sid's eyes. It gives viewers that permission to momentarily see Buffy as a sexual being when she is an underage child. Like,
yeah, well, also not just the way he says it, but his eyes start to half close and he kind of goes into this reverie. It also happens, I think, in the same conversation when he's talking about the Korean Slayer that he knew in the 90s.
Yeah.
And, oh, we had good times, but I was human then. And kind of also falling into that, yeah, you root for Sid because of his story, but also...
he's icky.
I mean, because even though he's a puppet, he's been around since the 30s. He should know better.
He lived through the second wave of feminism.
Anything else on Puppet Show? The only kind of medieval thing I have is the curse. And so I was going to lean into that and kind of wrap us up. Did you have anything other than...
I have Gothic heritage rather than medieval, so if you want to tell me about the curse, and then I'll tell you my little Gothic tidbit.
Perfect. So we once again have this idea of a soul being cursed. Last episode, we talked about Angel and his curse as a vampire, having his human soul returned to his body to create an ensouled vampire so that he could think about all the things he's done and care and experience guilt. So in this episode, we have Sid, who there were 7 of these, heart, brain eating demons. And he upset another demon, it sounded like, not one of those 7, because he was killing them. And so he was cursed to have his spirit, his soul, in the puppet body. But at the end, he says his body, his once human lived body, is now dust and bones. And when the curse is lifted, he will be free. So I just think that this, again, it begs the question of what is a soul? Is it the full personality and the full entity? But also, a soul is meant to be a good thing. And so for it to be cursed, now, his situation is different than Angel's, where Angel's being given back something, whereas here the soul is being trapped. And so that is a curse. But Buffy, I still think that that is an interesting semantic use and potential slippage of something that is meant to be pure and good and potentially divine, having a negative association with it. And at the end of the episode, we do have the beautiful moment. So Sid had killed 6 of the 7 demons. Once he kills the 7th, he's free. And so when Alex said the tableau of them at the end and Buffy's carrying his body, it is a very Shakespearean moment where Sid's soul has vacated the puppet. So the puppet is now just wood, but she's cradling and holding that body kind of as a loved one and with care. And you can tell she's upset. So it makes me think, of King Lear's carrying of Cordelia's body at the end and the 5 trochaic nevers. There's other scenes of similar caliber, but it is this like tragedy at the end. So I guess just to have us all kind of put pins in what is a soul and souls and curses and why are those always tethered together?
Yeah, and how a soul can be blighted by a curse. Like, that doesn't seem fair. That seems against the rules somehow, but here we are.
Yeah, so that was kind of my final thoughts on that. Alex, what's Gothic?
Well, the puppet aspect is actually pretty fun. I mean, we're all fairly familiar with the haunted toy motif. We've seen Chucky. We know of these things. But there's this really interesting one. So for the viewers, I'm holding up my copy of A Phantom Lover and Other Dark Tales by Vernon Lee. And this is the British Library stories of the weird collections that they've got going on. Love Vernon Lee. Vernon Lee is the nom de plume of Violet Paget. So it's a queer female writer. She was definitely a lover of women, but she also preferred to be called by her male name Vernon. And she dressed in male clothes and apparently did like male pronouns. So again, I don't like to retroactively look back and decide how people felt or presented themselves, but there is a possibility that if Vernon lived now, she would be a trans man. But I say she because there's enough ambiguity there that I can't make that choice for someone who has died, but I just wanted to put that out there. And she is a really interesting person to read because she brings this kind of queer lens to what she writes about. It's fascinating. And she also was a medievalist. So medieval stuff, like a dilettante medievalist. She was a self-directed medievalist, but crushingly intelligent. Absolutely beautiful stuff. She wrote this great short story called Sister Benvenuta and the Christ Child. And this takes place in what's a monastery for nuns?
Convent.
Convent, thank you. This takes place in a convent. Feel free to leave that in if you like. This takes place in a convent and it's with a young novice who becomes obsessed with these puppets that exist in the convent's storage facility. And the puppets were used to do, I think we could call them miracle plays. Like the medieval era had miracle plays where they'd have troops of actors who would go around to towns and they would put on theatrical performances of biblical stories as a way of getting across religious values to non-literate audiences and making it entertaining and making the stories stick and making the code of ethics stick. So there's this idea that these puppets belong to a miracle play. But yes, Sister Benvenuta becomes obsessed with the Christ child of the miracle plays, the puppet, and she tries to look after it and she tries to swaddle it and she tries to baby it, but she also gets a little bit preoccupied with the devil puppet who begins to have a sinister influence over her life. And I won't give any more information because you might want to go out and read it. Such a good story, but it does have that kind of puppet possessed somehow, kind of demonic. Ooh, chaos ensues. So it's actually quite a nice tie between our two episodes, that because you have the religious aspect, you have the medievalish stuff, you have the convent, and then you have the possessed toy, automaton, wooden creature, demon. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
No, definitely. I mean, with Moloch, we just kind of assume that because it's not his corporeal body that is found in the book, it's his soul, it's his essence, his entity, his spirit. They don't say it that way, but we know because then he's moved about in these different forms, right, and transmuted. So yeah, both episodes are about inanimate objects becoming powerful and cognizant of the world around them because they are imbued with the spirit or soul of some other power, some other spirit. So that's kind of the overarching of both episodes. Ta-da!
Very little on. I can't believe the puppet show gets better ratings than I Robot You, Jane. That's like a travesty. That should not be the case.
Yeah, I think part of it is because it's so much more monster of the week. We get so many horror shots with the intense underlighting and backlighting, and it plays with the idea of Snyder the demon. I think that also I Robot You, Jane is quite a heavy episode. We have self-harm, we have murder/suicide, and I think that it's an episode that it's more, what makes it great is the idea. At times the execution may be lacking. Whereas Puppet Show's idea is not fully thought through, but it's much more Buffy.
Yeah.
It's got Cordelia, and that could have been me.
Maybe that's a good opportunity for us to introduce our scene stealers then.
Absolutely.
Which one, do you want to do a scene stealer per episode, or do you want to do one each? What do you want to do?
I am open to all of the above. I mean, I guess I'll do one per episode. I Robot You, Jane. My scene stealer would probably be either Buffy's cheetah coat that she's wearing in the episode when she goes out at the end.
I've got to admit, like, one of the things, like, so I watched Buffy with my mum, who would occasionally interject with grown-up perspective on Buffy, which I did not appreciate, and sometimes I continue to not appreciate. For example, my mum would look at Cordelia and be like, you can tell she's older than the other actresses. You can't hide the hands. Look at her hands. She has old hands. And it gave me such a complex about hands. I was like, oh my God, my hands are so old. Withered hands. So thanks, Mum. But one of the things that she also pointed out that I thought was a lot of fun is that whenever Buffy's clothes get bulky, that's when you know there's going to be a fight scene because they need to hide how much bigger than Sarah Michelle Gellar her stunt double is.
Yeah, I guess I've noticed that without actually, like, clocking.
Yeah. I just quite liked absorbing the fashion, but my mum was there just ruining it with the, like, breaking the fourth wall. It's like, quiet, mother.
And yeah, I mean, so Buffy also wears a like a leopard mini dress in Puppet Show. So that's why I'm wearing my kind of, dear listeners, it's like a black faux tiger print. Was I was trying to embrace my inner Buffy animal print vibe. But Alex, what's your scene stealers?
So it definitely has to be in I Robot You, Jane. It has to be any interaction between Jenny and Giles. Like, there's the first one which sets it all up, which is where Giles goes, and the students are skimming the books into the computer. And Jenny swans up and goes, scan. And he goes, what? And she goes, scan it. And he just gives her this withering look of contempt, like the acting in just this 1 second expression. He goes, of course. Brilliant. Like, so, like, Anthony Stewart Head nails that just. And it's not for Jenny, it's for the concept. Like, he even makes sure that that is what comes across. He isn't in any way being antagonistic towards Jenny. He's being antagonistic towards computers, which Jenny loves. Like, that is, like, it's beautiful. And they have another moment where he wanders away and goes, I'll be back in the Middle Ages. And Jenny quips, did you ever leave? And he just looks at her. And it's this moment of, bravo. I hate it, but bravo. Walks off. And then with Talent Show, my scene stealer is the very last scene before the credits. But it's where Willow's like, I can't believe, like, the first guy I've ever been interested in, and it was a demon scamming me. That's so embarrassing. And Xander's like, hey, my first girlfriend was a bug. Big giant bug tried to kill me. And Buffy's like, yeah, I mean, first dude I've been interested in since moving here, and he's a vampire. What are the chances? We live on a hellmouth. It's always going to be complicated. And then they laugh and go, yeah, we're never going to have normal relationships. We're doomed. And then they all just, and the camera kind of pans out, and they're all just sat on a bench outside looking really small and troubled. And I'm like, yeah,
Babies.
little ones.
Yeah.
So I loved that as a comedy shot. I thought that was brilliant.
It's great. And I mean, again, cross-watch, there is none. It's just Buffy's earrings. Puppet Show, as I said earlier, the credits scene is, I think, a great place for us to kind of end and then get into our Who Are We? They're doing a scene from Oedipus Rex, and they're dressed up in togas. And I think it's so funny that they do this scene because you could argue that their avant-garde tableau, which is just after them killing the demon, could be their, like, performance.
Yeah, you could totally have just gone, it's Lynchian. We're doing a David Lynch, and everyone would have gone, yeah, sure. Because Twin Peaks was like early 90s and still Lynch, so.
But alas, they have to do this very classical scene from Oedipus Rex where Xander is Oedipus, Buffy is his mother.
Yeah, Jocasta.
And then Willow is we don't know because Willow panics and runs off the stage.
Like, I think she squeaks out one line and then panics and flees.
But Buffy's doing it and she's very like, oh, Oedipus, oh, no. And Xander has a lot of lines, and I will give him credit that even though he does freeze up, he was doing pretty well.
He gets through.
But he is just staring off into the distance. And again, Nicholas Brennan, his comedy, he's very good at it. Like, body comedy and kind of the fear of God. I mean, it's so perfect, his panic. And I guess one quick thing in I, Robot You, Jane. I love it in Buffy when they go for, like, the really cheesy comedy. So when Buffy jumps the fence to CRD when they're going to fight Malcolm, and then it's just a dummy that falls with a voiceover of Xander going, and then he just pops up like nothing happened.
But he full on like belly flops into concrete.
We at least one other I can think of. I just those kind of moments, but the performance by Nicholas Brennan, like the way he does the and then popping up, so good. But also, I thought it was interesting that they do Oedipus because very much like Cassandra, he talked about in regards to Giles, prophecies and stories of people saying this is what's going to happen or this is this and people not believing. And so just kind of showing that there is a lot of also classical influence in Buffy, and that's often acknowledged more, exponentially more than the medieval in Buffy. But it's a great scene stealer. The light, they're washed out on them, and they're all just different versions of high schoolers not wanting to do it, indifferent, terrified, and running through it, but also like, when will it end? I just have to get the lines out. Who cares? And I thought that it was a really good, it kind of shows their personalities.
Yeah, I do like that Buffy's indifferent. She can say the lines, she can be on the stage, but she really doesn't care because she saved the world multiple times. What is a school play? This is such a waste of time. But fine, she'll get through it because she has to.
Yeah, I have better things to do.
Yeah.
So, speaking of better things, I jest, because this podcast is great. Alex, where can people find you if they want to?
You can find me on Instagram if you search for Decadence and Dark Ages. That's where I'm the most active. I also have a website, which is literatureunlocked.org, and a ticket source shop for events that I run, again, under Literature Unlocked. So I do creative writing workshops, I do online lectures, I'm doing a book club as well on Interview with a Vampire at the end of the month. Yes, that's where you can find me. What about you, Megan? Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Instagram as well under the handle @morbidmay, and May is spelled MAE. I also use that handle on other social media platforms, or you can find information about myself and Alex on our shared website for this podcast, damesmacabre.com. So the way that the podcast is, you will find links to not only our social media and Alex's website there, but also to our bookshop affiliate account where I do my best to update with anything that we mention in this podcast. So it's kind of like a reading list, but not. And bookshop.org is about supporting independent booksellers, but we would also get a small kickback. And I believe that's it. I guess one last thing is thanking once again Black Coffee Worship for giving us the opportunity to collaborate, be sponsored, get free coffee, and talk about it because it's delicious.
It is very good. And again, you can get a discount with Dames Mac 10.
Yes, don't hesitate. Do it, everyone. It's worth it. But yeah, until next time, I'm Megan.
I'm Alex.
And this has been
Dames Macabre.